This is an incredibly fraught moment. I mean, the moment we're literally sitting in today as jets are flying over the heads of our European partners, as drones are being flown into Romanian airspace, into Polish airspace. And yet we are hearing reports that the Trump administration is considering withdrawing some of our troop presence from Romania, subject of today's hearing, and from Poland. Again, I don't necessarily believe in a world where the United States permanently has to have 60, 70, 100,000 troops in Europe. But at this moment, like right now, it would seem to be a curious time to send a signal that we're pulling out as drones and jets are flying in from Russia. What's your sense of the signal we would be sending to Putin if in the next 30 days we got an announcement from the Trump administration that they were pulling troops out of some of these frontline states?
Thank you for the question, Senator Murphy. Obviously, U.S. presence in Europe has been tantamount to ensuring the security over the past 75 years. I had the privilege of working on the House Armed Services Committee several years ago at the start of 2015, where we were spending money on European Reassurance Initiative, as you pointed out, then became European Deterrence Initiative, where we flooded the zone with pre-positioned equipment, rotational forces, training and exercises, which we're still doing today, which is completely and utterly necessary to increase deterrence value. I agree with you completely. I think Europe has received the message, and our NATO allies have received the message that they need to increase their capabilities and capacity, and they're doing that. But we are at a very critical juncture where that has not happened completely yet. And none of us have exactly what we need in a potential conflict. I think as we look at this, U.S. presence is absolutely crucial, not just from the sense of what do we want to do in Europe, but that's power projection for ourselves. We're not just in Europe to, train and exercise. We're there to be part of an alliance. We're there to ensure security and stability. And it has far reaches past the Black Sea, past the Caucasus, into Central Asia, et cetera. So I think it is absolutely critical that the U.S. remains a strong presence on the European continent.
I have one final question. I'll pose it to you, Dr. Starr. I think one of the most extraordinary directives that has come out of this State Department is a prohibition on our embassies opining on the fairness of elections. So our ambassadors have been told, even if you think that it's a rigged election, don't say it. That seems to be an invitation for a country like Russia to come in and play games because they are just not going to be called out on their provocations, on their corruption. I think that's extraordinary and I think very damaging to the United States' reputation, our power around the world, and our aligned democracies. You sort of teased the question of what's happening in Georgia today. This is a country that had made great progress, that was a fraught but working democracy with balance on both sides. And today we have a ruling party in Georgia that has reversed the progress on European integration, has moved dramatically backwards away from democratic norms. There have been huge protests, and yet they still have pushed forward laws that, suggest this country is sliding into something very, very different than a democracy. There's a headline out of Georgia that reads, "As USAID dies, many of Georgia's vibrant civil society organizations face extinction." Just like it would be a really bad moment right now for the United States to pull military support from a region of the world that is having Russian military incursions on a weekly basis, it seems like a really bad time for the United States to be pulling support for civil society and pro-democracy groups in Georgia. Well, there is still an open question as to whether Georgian democracy survives. What's your recommendation on what this administration should be doing to try to push back against this really troubling trend line in the country of Georgia?
Well, first, hats off to the Georgians for what they have accomplished over the decades since independence. It's not been an easy path. Remember, they were invaded by Putin in 2008. We did next to nothing. And therefore our authority there was qualified by that neglect. just as our authority in Ukraine was qualified by our failure to do anything after Putin stole Ukraine in 2014. So in general, though, it seems to me that we can be a little bit more optimistic than your question implies. Why do I say, with regard to Georgia, why do I say that? Because Putin is not a long-termer. It's over. Exactly when and how it will be over, it's over. He doesn't have the resources. He doesn't have the manpower. He doesn't have the export that he did have, and he has a society that is deeply, deeply alienated, not by the war, but by the economic hardship that is now felt by everyone outside of the two major cities. He's going to be out of there sooner than we think. And the minute that happens, Mr. Ivanishvili, even though he's moved his money out of Russia, he's out. And the whole situation in Georgia will change. I think we should be concentrating on what's going on in Russia. I do agree with you that we accomplished a lot through our support for various democratic institutions during that period. I also have to admit, having been an election observer several times in Central Asia, that there have been cases where officially sponsored observers by the U.S. have actually missed the reality and distorted things, which is widely known locally. So I'm for moderation on that. Not elimination, but moderation, but concentrating on the dominant issue throughout the region, and that is what's going to follow Putin in Russia. If it's more of the same or worse, we should be planning for it. If it's a dramatic change for the better, as occurred after the disastrous Russian defeat in the Crimean War in the 19th century, disastrous, that produced an age of reform. That's when they emancipated 90 million serfs before we freed slaves, 2 years before Lincoln. That's when they created a new legal system. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but we have to consider all post-Putin possibilities because they are going to determine the validity of what we propose and do now.
Well, it is certainly true that throughout history, it is the overextension of Russian military power that has led to collapse of Russian regimes. It is probably also true that it's been generally a bad bet to bet on Russian enlightenment following those moments of leadership change. But I think it's an important caution. We were told forever, for instance, that Assad was weak. It was just a matter of time. It seemed to be a fool's errand, and then all of a sudden, overnight, he was gone. And maybe we didn't spend enough time planning for that moment because we just didn't believe that it was true. And so it's, I think, wise counsel for us to think about how you would manage a post-Putin Russia, and maybe an opportunity for this committee to engage in important inquiry and a little bit of trolling at the same time.
During a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing on Tuesday, Senator Chris Murphy pressed Catherine Sendak, Director of Transatlantic Defense and Security at the Center for European Policy Analysis, on the message the United States would send to Vladimir Putin if it withdrew troops from frontline European states. Murphy framed the question against a backdrop of increased Russian military activity, jets and drones operating over Romanian and Polish airspace, and raised alarm at reports that the Trump administration was considering pulling forces out of Romania and Poland. Sendak responded that U.S. presence in Europe has been essential to deterrence and regional security for the past 75 years. While she acknowledged that European NATO members are strengthening their capabilities and taking on more responsibility, she warned that the alliance has not yet reached the point where it can fully substitute for a sustained American footprint. Prepositioned equipment, rotational forces, and training exercises remain necessary to preserve deterrence value. Withdrawing forces now, she suggested, would undermine that effort. Murphy also raised concern about a State Department directive forbidding U.S. ambassadors from publicly commenting on the fairness of foreign elections, arguing that silencing embassy voices could invite malign influence from actors like Russia and weaken U.S. credibility. He pointed to developments in Georgia as an example. The country has seen backsliding on democratic reforms, large protests, and laws that suggest a drift away from democratic norms. Murphy warned that cutting U.S. support for civil society and pro-democracy groups in Georgia at such a precarious moment would risk irreversible damage. Dr. Starr, another witness at the hearing, urged some restraint in expectations but emphasized the central strategic task, preparing for what follows Vladimir Putin. He argued that Putin's capacity for long-term, sustainable expansion is limited given Russia's economic and societal strains and suggested it is reasonable to plan for a post-Putin period, while recognizing that transitions can produce unpredictable outcomes. The exchange underscored bipartisan anxiety about timing and optics. Policymakers worry both about appearing to retrench at a moment of Russian provocation and about ensuring the United States remains engaged enough to influence political trajectories in vulnerable countries.